On a frozen January morning in 1945, inside a silent stone chateau in Luxembourg, one of America's greatest generals was handed proof of a crime so severe it carried a mandatory death sentence. The evidence did not accuse Nazis. It did not name collaborators. It accused American soldiers, victors, heroes, liberators, of executing unarmed prisoners of war. What happened next was never taught in schools, never shown in documentaries, and never recorded in official transcripts. There was no trial, no arrest, no justice. Instead, a fire was lit, a folder was destroyed, and a truth vanished into smoke. This is the story of what was burned, why it was erased, and how the idea of a good war was quietly compromised in the snow. Main script: January 4th, 1945, began like many other days in the Ardennes, silent, frozen, and heavy with exhaustion. The headquarters of the United States Third Army was housed in a converted chateau in Luxembourg, its stone walls built for nobility, not war. The building looked sturdy from the outside, but inside it was bitterly cold. The heating system had failed weeks earlier. The radiators were useless slabs of metal. Frost gathered in the corners of rooms, and breath lingered in the air like smoke. The only source of warmth was a massive fireplace in the main office, where thick logs burned slowly, popping and cracking as sap boiled beneath their bark. General George S. Patton stood close to the fire, his back to the room, his gloved hands extended toward the flames. He was a man shaped by war, sharp-featured, rigid in posture, and carrying the weight of command in every movement. To the outside world, Patton was a legend. He was the aggressive commander who had driven his army across France with relentless speed. He was the man who had turned his forces north and smashed through German lines to relieve Bastogne. His reputation was that of a ruthless professional, intolerant of weakness, obsessed with discipline, and fiercely loyal to his men. When the door opened behind him, Patton did not turn immediately. The man who entered was a major from the Inspector General's office, and he knew he was walking into history. His boots echoed softly on the stone floor as he approached the heavy oak desk at the center of the room. Under his arm was a thick manila folder stamped "Top Secret" in bold black letters. The folder was swollen with documents, signed statements, typed summaries, maps, timelines, and lists of names. It contained something far more dangerous than enemy intelligence. It contained proof that American soldiers had committed a mass execution. The major placed the folder on the desk with careful precision, as though it were fragile or explosive. In many ways, it was both. He cleared his throat, unsure whether to speak or wait. His training told him to remain professional. His instincts told him that nothing about this moment was routine. He expected Patton to explode with anger, to demand immediate arrests, to uphold the strict code of military justice he was known for enforcing. Under the Articles of War, the charges outlined in that folder carried only one possible punishment: death by hanging. Patton finally turned around. His face was calm, unreadable. He did not reach for the folder. He did not ask who was accused. He did not demand details. He glanced briefly at the stamped cover, then shifted his gaze back to the fire, as if weighing something invisible. Without sitting down, he stepped forward, picked up the folder, and began walking toward the fireplace. The major froze. His mind raced through regulations, oaths, and procedures. This was evidence. This was an active investigation. This was not something a commander could simply dispose of. And yet, that is exactly what Patton appeared ready to do. In the next few seconds, a choice would be made that no court would ever review and no history book would openly record. To understand why Patton would even consider such an act, it is necessary to leave the warmth of the chateau and return to the frozen hellscape of the Ardennes forest, where the boundaries between law, survival, and revenge had already collapsed. The winter of 1944 was the harshest Europe had experienced in decades. Temperatures dropped below zero for weeks at a time. Snow fell relentlessly, covering roads, fields, and forests in a white silence that masked danger. Weapons malfunctioned as lubricants froze solid. Radios failed, vehicles stalled, men lost fingers, toes, and sometimes entire limbs to frostbite. Faces turned gray, then black as circulation failed. Soldiers slept in holes scraped from frozen earth, wrapped in whatever scraps they could find. Yet the physical cold was only part of the suffering. The psychological strain was far worse. The German offensive that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge shattered Allied confidence. Units were cut off. Supply lines vanished. Command structures broke down. Rumors spread unchecked, feeding fear and paranoia. Stories circulated of German commandos led by Otto Skorzeny, men who spoke fluent English, wore American uniforms and infiltrated behind the lines to sabotage, assassinate, and sow chaos. Trust evaporated. Soldiers stopped believing what they saw and heard. Every unfamiliar face was a potential enemy. Every wrong answer at a checkpoint could mean death. The laws of war, carefully written, carefully taught, felt absurd in a place where survival depended on instinct rather than regulation. The Geneva Convention became an abstract idea, disconnected from reality. Adding to the tension was the nature of the enemy itself. This was not just the regular German army. This was the Waffen-SS, ideological fanatics with a reputation for brutality. They were known for massacres in Eastern Europe and for showing no mercy to those who surrendered. American troops knew the stories. Some had seen the aftermath firsthand. Fear turned into hatred, and hatred turned into a willingness to abandon restraint. Back in the United States, the public held on to a comforting narrative. They believed the war was a clear struggle between good and evil. The Nazis were monsters who murdered civilians and prisoners. American soldiers were liberators who fought with honor and restraint. This belief was reinforced by newsreels, speeches, and official statements. The image of the American GI was carefully cultivated, disciplined, humane, morally superior. Military manuals supported this image. They clearly stated that prisoners of war must be protected, fed, and treated with dignity. Killing a surrendered enemy was murder. Officers carried these manuals. Chaplains preached these values. On paper, the rules were clear. On the front line, paper meant nothing. The difference between lawful combat and atrocity often came down to emotion, exhaustion, and whether anyone would ever know. Commanders believed they could unleash violence during battle and then restrain it once the enemy surrendered. They believed discipline could be switched on and off at will. They were wrong. Once the switch was flipped, it did not flip back easily. The breaking point came on December 17, 1944, at a snowy crossroads near Malmedy, Belgium. Around midday, an American unit from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion encountered elements of an advancing SS armored group. Outnumbered and outgunned, the Americans surrendered. They were disarmed and gathered in an open field. What followed was not confusion or panic. It was execution. SS troops opened fire with machine guns and pistols. The killing lasted several minutes. 84 American prisoners were murdered in cold blood. Some died instantly. Others were shot as they lay wounded in the snow. A handful survived by pretending to be dead, remaining motionless as blood froze onto their uniforms. When night fell, they crawled away and eventually reached American lines. Their story spread rapidly. It moved through command channels, mess halls, and foxholes with shocking speed. The name Malmedy became synonymous with betrayal and rage. It was no longer just a massacre, it was a turning point. For many American soldiers, it erased any remaining hesitation about how to treat SS prisoners. An unspoken rule emerged. The SS would not be spared. This mindset did not lead to immediate chaos. It led to something far more dangerous: deliberate retaliation. 2 weeks later, on January 1, 1945, American forces from the 11th Armored Division were clearing the Belgian village of Chenogne near Bastogne. The fighting was intense and personal, with soldiers moving from house to house, room to room. By afternoon, the village was secured. Dozens of German soldiers surrendered. Among them were approximately 60 members of the Waffen-SS, identifiable by their uniforms and insignia. They were disarmed. They were guarded. They were marched to a snow-covered field behind the village. What happened next was not a firefight. It was organized. A machine gun was set up carefully. Ammunition was loaded methodically. Orders were given. The gun fired. The prisoners fell in waves. Those who survived the initial bursts were killed with rifles. It was a mirror image of Malmedy, only this time, the victims were German and the shooters were American. The Chenogne massacre was complete. Bodies can be hidden temporarily, but not forever. Civilians had seen what happened. Other soldiers knew. Rumors reached higher headquarters. On January 2nd, the Inspector General's office launched a formal investigation. This was not a symbolic gesture. Investigators collected sworn statements, documented evidence, and compiled detailed reports. They identified the unit involved, the officers responsible, and the legal implications.
The file was devastating. Under military law, the crime demanded prosecution. The potential fallout was enormous. A public trial would hand enemy propagandists a powerful weapon. It would challenge the carefully maintained image of moral superiority. It would raise uncomfortable questions about command responsibility. The file moved up the chain of command until it reached the desk of the man who now stood before the fire in Luxembourg. Patton finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost detached, as he asked the major to summarize the allegations. When the major finished, Patton nodded slowly. He walked closer to the flames. The orange light reflected off his helmet and polished boots. He looked at the folder one last time, then delivered a verdict that would never appear in any official record. He made it clear that there would be no prosecution. He made it clear that he would not allow his men to be punished for killing those he viewed as butchers. With a simple motion, he threw the folder into the fire. The pages curled, blackened, and disintegrated. Names disappeared. Testimonies vanished. Justice turned to ash. The major said nothing. He saluted, turned, and left the room, understanding that speaking further would end his career. Inside, the fire burned on, indifferent to the truth it had consumed. Patton's decision was rooted not in ignorance, but in belief. He believed war was a brutal, tribal struggle. He believed morale mattered more than legal purity. He believed prosecuting his men would destroy their willingness to fight. In his mind, protecting his soldiers, even guilty ones, was an act of command. The investigation vanished. No arrests were made. The 11th Armored Division returned to combat. A message spread quietly through the ranks: their general would protect them. The result was a more ruthless, more aggressive force, but also a moral wound that never healed. History remembered the victory. It forgot the fire. And sometimes, the most dangerous truths are not the ones we lose, but the ones we choose to burn.